This video will be a continuation of videos on the employee setup, and we'll focus on the payroll and employment tabs of the employee setup. I'm going to return to employee setup by going to setup and employees. I will highlight the employee we've been working on and select edit. I'm going to highlight the payroll tab. When I get to the payroll tab, what you'll see in the top left corner of the screen is a list of possible employers that this employee works for. So these will be employers that have been set up in the database. I've only got one employer in this database, but you could have a list of multiple employers within that database, and that employee could actually work for more than one employer. So as you as you highlight the employer, the information that you fill in will be for that employee specific to that employer. So you may have to set it up more than one time, once for each employer. It'll also tell you whether that employee is active or inactive for that employer by the active status. As I highlight the employer on the right-hand side, the first thing I'm going to need to select is the pay period for the employee. Now, the pay period is used in the calculation of taxes, so it tells the system what tax table to be looking at to go ahead and calculate the taxes for that employee. So you want to make sure that you select the correct pay period frequency. One of the other things that the pay period frequency does is for salary employees, it allows the system to determine what their annual wage is and then take that annual wage and divide it by the number of pay periods to get what that person should be paid in this particular pay period. Now, the only one that you might want to be careful about here is the biweekly pay period. We always assume that there are 26 periods if you pay biweekly. However, there may be some years where there winds up being 27 pay periods. In that case, there is actually a preference where you can go in and tell us what year it is and that there's 27 pay periods. And then that helps avoid the salary employees getting paid for an extra pay period or an extra wage within that year. So you'll want to make sure that you select that. I'm going to select weekly. That's how we pay our employees. And then I will right click on it and set it as a default. Now, setting it as a default means that when I create another new employee, that box will be filled out with the correct pay period and I won't have to worry about it. You can select what pay method is the default pay method for this employee. I'm going to select hourly for this employee. However, even though I select hourly, this employee might even be paid piece rate. Selecting a pay method here is just used for filtering employees on a list of employees. For example, when you go to do timesheets, you could filter for those employees that are hourly employees, or when you go to do a pay run, you can filter for them, or if you go to run a report. So it allows you to filter for employees of a specific pay method, but it doesn't prohibit you from paying them using another method. Below that is a checkbox or is a selection box for work shifts. And this is for employers who set up different work shifts and pay employees a premium for certain work shifts. If you are using work shifts, you can select what the default work shift is for this employee in the box here, but you can change that work shift when you're putting in a timesheet or when you're putting in a pay run. I would click on the lookup and select the work shift. I don't have any there right now, but if you needed to set up new work shifts, you can also just click the new button there to create a new work shift. The minimum wage contract box is typically used for H-2A employees in a situation where the employer is paying something other than the default minimum wage for that employee. It's usually a minimum wage contract that is typically higher than what the default minimum wage would be. So you can set up those contracts underneath Setup, and payroll details and minimum wage contracts, and then you would be able to select the contract here. You can also click and create new contracts by clicking the new button here. This is not a agricultural worker and they're not an H-2A worker, so I'm not going to select a minimum wage contract. We always have one check stub style within the system. Everybody's check stub style will be in English. However, if you have workers that you need to do a pay stub translation for, you can set up different pay stub translations underneath setup and payroll details, and there's a place here for pay stub translations. If you have done another pay stub translation, you can select the default pay stub for this employee in the box over here. On the bottom left-hand side of the screen is a section for retirement plan reporting, and we have a module that can be purchased for retirement plan exports. That allows you to export the information electronically to a retirement plan administrator. We would need to get the format that they need to receive the information in, but some of the information that is required for that is to mark whether an employee qualifies for a retirement plan and participates in it. This is also used for Section 125 plans. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen is a section used for federal reporting information. We assume that each employee that you set up isn't going to be reported on a 943 unless you are, a 941 unless you are an agricultural employer and the information is required to be reported on a 943. In that case, you'll need to mark your employee that they need to be reported on the 943. If you are an agricultural employer and most of your employees are agriculture, you can right click there and set that as a default so that when you go to create a new employee, it'll be marked automatically. I'm going to uncheck that because this is not an agricultural employer that I'm setting up the information for. Below that is a spot where you can mark whether or not this employer is paying the employee's portion of FICA and Medicare for them. There are different selections that you would need to make besides, or different things that you would need to set up besides just checking this box. But if the employer is paying the employee's share of FICA and Medicare, one requirement is to check this box right here. If you are an agricultural employer and this employee is an H-2A employee, you'll want to check the box here to mark them as an H-2A employee. If they're a statutory employee, you'll mark it here. If you, as an employer, are paying the Social Security and Medicare for that employee during the time period in which they are receiving third-party sick pay, you'll also check this box right here. It should default to the employee's wages being reported on a W-2, but we do have a selection of employee wages being reported on a 1099 as well. We integrate with a product called Atrix to produce your W-2s, and if you are subject to the Affordable Care Act, to also produce 1095s for this employee. Now, one of the options that Atrix offers for both of those forms is to send them to an employee electronically only. You'll want to review the videos on those particular subjects to get a little more description of some of the options that you have. But if you choose the option of just providing the employee with that electronically, you'll want to check the box here, and then we'll send that information to Atrix, who is our tax forms provider, so that they know that that employee is going to receive that information electronically. If they don't sign a consent to receive it electronically only, then you are obligated by law to provide them with a printed copy. So you'll want to make sure that they sign that consent. The last checkbox on this screen has to do with something called the HIRE Act, which was enacted in 2010 and was an incentive for employers to hire unemployed workers. That act is now expired. I'm going to go over to the Employment tab next by clicking on the Employment tab. And again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the different employers that you could be setting up the information for. So you'll want to make sure that you're highlighted on the correct employer, and the information can be different for that same employee, but different employers. The first box on the screen is going to allow us to select a supervisor for this employee, but that person has to be set up as an employee already, so this may be something that I need to return to since I haven't set up any other employees. You can run reports by supervisor, so there's different reports that can be filtered by the supervisor. This is also used in our CenterPoint time clocks as a feature of that person being allowed to take and approve or not approve this particular employee's time. You can set up multiple job titles for your employees. If the job title is not created yet, you can click on the new box to create a new one, and it's just a matter of giving it an abbreviation and a name. Otherwise, you can select from a previously set up job title for this employee. The department will allow you to, setting up payroll departments and assigning a default department to an employee will allow you to get reporting out by different departments. It'll also allow you to filter many different lists, whether it's be for a report or whether it be for creating a pay run or entering in timesheets. It'll allow you to filter things by the department. But it is possible that an employee works in multiple departments. So even if you select a department here, you can change that department as you're putting in their time or going ahead and paying that employee. The status of the employee is going to be either full-time, other, part-time, or temporary. So you'll select the status for this employee. Now you'll have to look up on the government site of standard occupational classes, which standard occupational class applies to this employee. This is something that started in 2022 where you're required to report this for employees on your quarterly tax reports. So the fourth quarter of 2022 required that. This is a 6-character field with a 7th character that is a formatting character. The original hire date and the hire date are typically the same for most employees. However, you might have an employee that worked for you before and came back to work at another time, and you may want to take and keep track of what their original hire date is and what their current hire date is. The hire date is always what their current hire date is. Some people use this for employees that started as part-time, where maybe you didn't allow for uh, leave during that part-time status and then became full-time employees, and then leave was determined based off of their full-time date, because the hire date is always used when looking at leave tables as to how many years that that person has worked. If an employee is terminated, you can put in a termination date, and then you can also select or type in a reason. There is a drop-down box. There's a little arrow at the screen there that allows you to select from previously entered in reasons. If there aren't any previously entered in reasons, you can go ahead and type in a new reason. And then for future employees, that becomes one of the things that you can select on another employee at a later time without having to retype it. I'm going to take and get rid of that because this employee is a new employee and hasn't been terminated yet. You will always have a place for a last raise date. There, when you go to update an employee's rate of pay, you'll also have a place at that same selection to tell the system whether you want it to update their last raise date. Otherwise, you would have to manually come in here and update their last raise date. So the system will allow you to do it at the time that you change the person's rate of pay, or you can manually update it. It also allows for certain employers who keep track of or who change somebody's or give people a raise based off of the number of hours that they work. So you can put in here, let's say that you give them a raise every 1,000 hours that they work. You can put in 1,000 hours, and then as you enter in the number of hours that that person worked and save that pay run, it'll deduct it from the next number of hours to their next raise. Okay, if you don't use that, then you can just leave that at 0 there. The system will keep track of the last pay run that the employee was paid on. So this is a box that you can't type in, but once they are paid in a pay run, it should show what the last pay run that they were paid in was up here. On the bottom left of the screen is some EEOC information. It's typically used for EEOC reporting. Underneath reports and underneath payroll setup lists, and underneath employees, there is a EEOC employment report that you can run that would show, what workers you have of each different status here. There are also some states that require some EEOC reporting, and the information is pulled from this screen. Otherwise, it's optional for you to go ahead and fill in this information, but there is a place here for the person's birth date, whether or not they are a male, female, or non-binary, what their EEOC position is, their EEOC class, their marital status, and whether or not they're a veteran. So this also allows you to track, what people you have that work for you that are veterans or not. Below that are some boxes that allow you to create links to different documents that you may have out there that you want to link to this employee's record. To do that, you would just click on the link, and then you would be able to browse for where that document is located. For some of these other forms on the right, besides the photo, you also have a date that you can put in what the date was that that form was received, and then link to the document. Now, this link is exactly what I said. It's a link. If that folder gets moved, then all of your links are broken. Or if the database gets moved, all of your links are broken. So instead of doing those links, what you may want to explore is an option to scan it in using these icons at the bottom of the screen. You might want to scan in those documents and save them in either the file repository or as part of the database. That way those links won't get broken. That takes us through this portion of the setup. You'll want to explore the other videos and continue to go through the different tabs on the employee setup.